This is Longevity Industries' presentation of the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast. I am Dean Phillips. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Precision Metal Forming Association and the PMA's Educational Foundation, for all their support. It is my distinct pleasure today. I have Vincent Howell with us, and he is an international director, of course, with the SME, similar to myself, and he is recently retired from Corning Incorporated LCD division, and when he retired, he was the manager of intellectual assets. Welcome, Vincent.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you here. And, of course, we work together a lot on the SME. But
Yes.
I did want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. This is over Thanksgiving, and he took time away from his family to be here, so I want to thank him for that.
I appreciate the opportunity.
So right off the bat, what do you think is the key takeaway for our 5-year picture of manufacturing?
As I think about the 5-year picture of manufacturing, I realize that manufacturing is very broad and includes a number of facets. But from my perspective, one of the things that manufacturing cannot overlook at this time or even within the next 5 years is the importance of protecting manufacturing's crown jewels. Manufacturing creates trade secrets and other intellectual assets such as drawings and processes and data associated with the process, how we set up equipment, and those become really critical for making sure the technology advantage of an organization is maintained. And that's especially important, not only for large organizations, but also for small and medium-sized manufacturing organizations. I think that's a really critical thing going forward.
Right. And I would actually think it's even more critical for small companies because it's too easy for them to be kind of bullied in some ways by bigger corporations. And it's even more important for them to protect those intellectual assets.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. The other component of that is the size of the organization also has implications to what resources and maybe staff that can be utilized to understand and define processes for protecting those crown jewels. The key question that has to be asked is how can these assets be protected? And that comes in the avenue of training, that is policies, that's being aware of different components and technology that has implications. It means working with the IT resources, be they internal or contracted IT resources. So again, like you said, really, really critical going forward.
Yeah, I could see that. Tell us a little bit about your background.
40 years in manufacturing. I have worked in defense electronics. I have worked in electronics associated with developing telephone systems. And the last 20 plus years, I worked for Corning Incorporated, which is a company that focuses on a number of businesses. I worked in the area of liquid crystal display, glass manufacturing, and did a number of roles relative to technology implementation, managing staff, and as well as technology portfolios, engineering portfolios. And when I retired, I served as the manager of intellectual asset protection, and that includes looking at how do we protect the crown jewels, putting in place systems to help us do that, doing the audit processes to assure that when we develop processes, when we develop policies, then we actually follow them. And so it has a component of continuous improvement because technology changes, the marketplace changes, needs for the organization changes. And again, I think it's a living process, especially policies, because new technology comes along, and we've always got to be adaptive and flexible to continue to move forward in achieving the objectives of the organization.
I think it's interesting that you said that following those policies? Because one of the things I learned a long time ago working for a company that had copyright protection, and one of the challenges is that you need to make sure that whether it's trademark or whether it's copyrighted information, that you have to follow your own policies, because if you don't follow them, you can't enforce it on somebody else.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that raises an important component of protecting intellectual assets. There's work that is done in, I would say, three components. What we do, say, within manufacturing. How do we train our folks and make sure they're aware of things that they can do to maintain security of those assets? Secondly, there's the IT organization that puts in place systems, and also they would have policies for maintaining those systems. Things like, how do we utilize the computers that are used within the organization? How do we utilize things like shared files? How do we utilize things like even as simple as thumb drives? And then third, it also has a component of tying in the legal community, because some things become patents, and that's a legal aspect of manufacturing that's important. So it does. We've got if we have a policy in place and we've got guidelines in place, it has implications for what we do internally as well as how we interface with those outside. So if it becomes a legal issue, then those questions then become a part of the discussion.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Tell me a little bit about some of the other things that you see changing over the next 5 years.
Over the next 5 years, clearly IT resources and IT technologies will change. Information technology continuously changes. For example, we all have smartphones, and we noticed over the years that they change. The ability to connect changes. For example, related to that, what also changes is how we store data and information. Oftentimes in the past there were a lot of servers, and now there's cloud computing. Mm-hmm. So that probably will continue, and how we manage those processes is critical. Things like understanding the role of social media and how that might also provide risk. And then another piece is, I think, making sure the manufacturing engineers and engineers working on designs and processes are sensitive to potential future patents. We work on a lot of cool projects within manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And as we do the work, we've got to be sensitive to, is this something that might be patentable? Is this something that will be critical to the company's technology advantage? So employees need to be trained and understand that component, as well as there need to be processes within the company, within the organization, to make sure that we can maintain the privacy of that information.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is when we talk about things like information technology, and especially with so many companies outsourcing aspects of this to foreign entities and other countries to have those services performed, how critical is it then to make sure that those same policies are carried over to as far as cybersecurity and everything else by those outsourced individuals?
Yep. I think the question of outsourcing also has an implication to collaboration. So, for example, if we then develop our intellectual asset protection policies within the organization, clearly there are going to be organizations that have a need to interface with other organizations, not just internally. But what happens when, for example, if a company designs a particular piece of equipment, but they outsource the actual build of a part of it or even the whole. Mm-hmm. So the question then becomes, how do we make sure that we have the agreements in place for our collaborative partners? And do we have non-disclosure agreements in place that assure that the information that exchanges between the two organizations stays between those two organizations? And that's also still critical, be it an organization within the company, within the country, another division, and if we work with a collaborative partner that may be in an international or global setting. So very critical that we do have the proper guidelines for controlling access to information. For example, if there's a design team working on a particular component of a design, every engineer within the company or the collaborative partner doesn't necessarily need to know all of the information about that, even though they may be in the same company. I think we still got to think in terms of who really needs to know the specific information. If you take some bigger players that maybe we operate within the global sphere of our country, I'm sure there's folks that have patented or even recipes for products that are critical to its business picture. But I would venture to say that everybody in the company doesn't know the formula. Only those that are in the need to know. And so those are things also that need to be managed.
Right. Do you see that also as a challenge when you start a business? A lot of people will tell you whenever you start a partnership or any kind of a business, you need to have an exit strategy as soon as you start, mainly because you need to decide up front what if we decide to split ways, decide to go in different directions, who owns what and who gets to keep what, and what is the compensation for the partnership as it is and as it grows. Is that an important part of that strategy?
I think it is important. I know one of the questions I've had in the past is, when I mentioned, I serve in the space of intellectual asset protection, many times folks will say, "Oh, you must be a lawyer." But the legal component is part of it. But there are the manufacturing and the business components of it also. Mm-hmm. So yes, starting, even in entrepreneurial endeavor, does require that, you do look at the legal components of it. Who owns what? And be that between an organization, or be it, for example, one of the things that I think that's out there that's, I think, very intriguing and provides a good base for knowledge and technology development, and that is partnerships between industry and academia. So, for example, then when there's joint development work, who owns it? Who has the rights to it? Who has rights to what components? And the way you manage that is not only the human interface and discussions, but also with the appropriate legal contracts.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting aspect, because I know a lot of companies do outsource, let's say, their R&D work to colleges to do research for them, to experiment on these products. And what is the ramifications of that if you don't have an agreement? That's, I guess, the key component is, what if you don't have anything? Then what?
I don't know that there's a clear answer to that. I know that there can be many answers to that, depending on where the innovation lands. I mean, and the timing. For example, there can be joint R&D done that really has futuristic implications. So maybe in 2019, it might not be used. But what happens when we get to 2025 and there's a technology or product that might come from that particular innovation and that work in the future? So that's why I think it's, again, important up front to have those discussions and to make sure the right legal people are involved, right agreements are involved, so that it's clear for the university, clear for the company. And here's another piece of that same puzzle. Oftentimes, there are projects where university students, be it undergraduate or graduate, do internships.
Mm-hmm.
So they too need to be clearly in the know about what are their responsibilities for protecting intellectual asset protection. The other part of that is many organizations use contract sources, contract labor, contract consultants. They too need to have a clear understanding as to what are the intellectual protection policies for the work that they do.
Yeah, it's a lot to cover in that. Now, when you talk about these policy documents and that to cover yourself, what all is covered in something like that? The what to do, how to do it, and who does it? Is all of that, or is there more than that?
I would say it's more than that, and I think for the time that we have, I probably would exceed that amount of time, going through the types of things that would need to be included. But let me just give you a few examples. So there, in those kinds of policies, there are human resource related items, because within a company, there is information about employee data. Mm-hmm. All right. And why that becomes important is, if you, monitor the world of manufacturing, the world of cybersecurity, we've often heard stories about how there's been data breaches that have attacked personal data from certain companies. So that's important. How we do procurement becomes part of it. How we do things like awareness for something we call phishing. For example, everybody's got email, mm-hmm. and we get so much email that comes through. Some of it, comes from colleagues. Some of it comes from trade organizations. But at the same time, many of it looks real, but it might not be. So there is spam, there's malicious websites, email messages that try to trick people into divulging sensitive information, such as bank and credit card accounts. So,
right.
And we all get, emails from unknown sources. So from a information security perspective, opening these emails is a risk. So company needs to initiate awareness program to educate employees regarding potentially malicious emails. And I mentioned earlier, social media. I mentioned who talks to who outside of the organization. Those are just a couple of them. And another one I would probably highlight would be something that we call BYOD, or bring your own device. So if you have an organization and you have contract employees, contract staff that works on critical projects, the question then becomes, especially from a small or medium size, are they in a position to issue a computer to that resource so that the information is only worked on within the constraints of the system itself? Or what happens if you're saying the employee can bring their own computer? So how do you control the company information that gets on someone else's computer? Even though you would have agreements, non-disclosure agreements, etc. But some of the things that might be considered there is, how do you deal with the risk of loss? And what happens when that computer maybe stops working? What happens when it gets lost or stolen? And you could have company information on that could get in the hands of someone else.
Sure. I could see that you have to kind of spell all of those things out, and you have to have those policies and procedures in place before something happens.
That's right. And these policies and procedures then become, this is how we operate. This is the guideline of how the organization works. So that, and you, like I said, you try to think it through short term and long term, short view as well as the futuristic view of what might be needs of the future. and then constantly relook at it. You don't create the document and just let it sit. You create the document and maybe you re-audit it every 9 months or a year or a shorter time to make sure that we haven't learned something new that has implications for our intellectual asset protection. Gotta protect those crown jewels of the manufacturing organization.
Yes. What are some of the industry challenges you expect to see over the next 5 years?
Over the next 5 years, well, let's see. I like to monitor the industry to see what say have been trends, and in doing that, I've captured, for example, there's studies out there that talk about, maybe the top 10 cybersecurity risks for 2019. For example, there's a publication called the U.S. Cybersecurity Magazine, and one of the things they've recently issued is, some of the risks for 2019, which has implications for the future. So things like data breaches, also abuse of the cloud. And, cloud is not that new, but it's something that's continually we're learning how to do it and how to improve. So things like understanding network traffic and how that might have implications. Again, malware attacks. They're another way of breach that needs to be watched out for the future. Again, I mentioned loss of data, hackers, and another component of that is if you kind of take a look at what's happening in the world of cybersecurity, there are reports out there that, for example, talk about significant cyber incidents. And so it's important to kind of keep an eye on that type of thing and to understand what might have the implications for a particular industry or a particular type of product. And I think there's critical learning there. So I think, again, what I would add is continuous learning and continuous improvement because those same kinds of quality foundations are important for protecting intellectual assets.
Mm-hmm. Do you see more instances now coming up of things like ransomware and that? Is that just a factor of the number of people using it, or is it just that there's so much more activity in that area that it's become such more of a hazard?
It's probably a multifaceted. More and more things are connected now. Mm-hmm. The Internet of Things, connects a number of components. As I mentioned, we're utilizing cloud-based technologies and storage. And I think with that, with continued growth in data, more challenges come up. So, and we can't overlook also the importance of making sure that we don't have insider threats and breaches also. Because it's, like I said, it's important for training staff, training the employees on the importance of making sure that they patch up any weak points. We've got to measure activity and make sure that everybody's sensitive to and monitoring those processes internally. So, if you study the topic, there have been times when there have been internal breaches of information too.
What would your suggestions be if you had to name a top 1, 2, or 3 of things you can do to protect yourself, protect your company and its assets? What would be the top things you would suggest?
Top things I would suggest, I'm going to answer that from the perspective of maybe a small to medium-sized manufacturing organization, for example.
Okay.
Again, I go back and say make sure you establish information protection policies. Secondly, I would highly emphasize the importance of working closely with the company information technology resources. They have tools, and those tools can be controls and management of systems. Um, they have the latest information on technology that can be implemented to secure computers, PLCs, USB devices, smartphones, data storage options. I would continually, as we utilize email as a communication tool, make sure that we have regular uh, uh, phishing awareness. Uh, that is making sure that people understand what phishing is, and make sure that it's something that's monitored internally. For example, is there a way to you might do a test to see if people are opening emails that they really shouldn't.
Right.
Again, keep in front of us the risk associated with social media. Because social media also poses information loss risks when employees share or post data about their work or their company travel, not realizing that this can be sensitive data, for example. And then again, I'd like to highlight again, engineering is a critical component of this. So patents, making sure that there are things that get pointed out that come out of research and development, making sure we make decisions related to is it patentable, is it going to be something that's a trade secret, and also that brings in the appropriate legal resources to determine viability or patentability. And I guess one final thought would be that everyone in the company must understand the importance of protecting that important information. These are assets, lifeblood of the company's future.
Excellent. Well, Vincent, it has been a great pleasure to have you on here today. Thank you again for taking time out of your holiday schedule to be on here with me.
My pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with the world of manufacturing, because manufacturing is the lifeblood of, I think, our country, I think our world. And what we learn in manufacturing really provides a foundation for the future.
Excellent. I really appreciate it, sir. Everybody go out and make it a great day.
All right. Thank you very much, Dean.
Thank you.